to bring new responses, to think about the future in a different way. Innovative because in regard of the complexity that we are confronted, we need to think in an innovative way and to think out of the box. Inclusive, and I think this room shows, with more than 65 nationalities coming from all around the world, that we need to think about the new world order and the new world disorder all together, coming from all parts of the world. And interactive, I think the shape of this room shows that we really want, to be closer. This is not a traditional setting with the podium with the people who know and the room with the people who listen, but this is really part of an all-together community. So, before I finish, just two housekeeping remarks. The first one, and I must confess that we took, in a way, a false start, but we need to be extremely punctual. As you have seen, we have an extremely busy schedule, so I really call for everyone to make sure that we stick with the time, and in that respect, we have sort of a jingle, a sound announcement that I would like you to listen, because during those 2 days you will hear it all the time, and usually it works. And the sound is very familiar, and thanks to the magic of YouTube, we have collected those sounds announcements from all train stations and airports from all around the world. So when you hear those sounds announcements, you know that you better hurry, otherwise you will miss your train or you will miss your plane. So here it's the same. When you hear this sound, please get back to the room, otherwise you will miss great ideas and you will miss great talks. Now, I said before that the forum was inspired by those 4 eyes. I should actually have said that there was also a 5th eye, which is the eye of island. We are here on the island of Patmos, of Rhodes. And this island of Rhodes has been hosting the forum for the past 17 years, offering a unique atmosphere and environment for discussion. And we are extremely grateful for the municipality of Rhodes to welcome us and to also be a partner of this forum. And I have the pleasure to give the floor to Deputy Mayor in charge of Culture and Tourism, Mr. Taraslias. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Boss. Honorable guests, welcome to Rhodes, the Emerald Island of the South Aegean, which is located at the crossroads of civilizations where South and North, East and West meet and have interacted for centuries. We are proud that for yet another year you have chosen our island as a meeting point for such important and outstanding participants, internationally recognized personalities in the field of politics, the international and academic community, cultural diplomacy, and other important organizations in the world. We truly consider it our honor that as the municipality of Rhodes, we are your host again this year for the 70th Dialogue of Cultures Forum. The timing of the conference on global arrest, opinions based on international dialogue is, as one might say, tragically pertinent, and your presence here gains much importance, perhaps more than ever, because it is becoming imperative now the need for a transnational dialogue to ensure the peace and coexistence of the people in the sensitive region of the southern and eastern Mediterranean. The international community today has to deal with hot issues, and the issues that are raised in this year forum are all about the current events happening around us. Greece's geographical position puts it in a particularly vulnerable position today, as developments are likely to have unpleasant consequences with new large flows of refugees. For this reason, the new dialogue culture advocated by the Forum of Rhodes, the understanding and especially the moral resilience of the participants may provide solutions that will be promoted to the political and strategic decision makers today, but also society in general. Today, the economy tends to globalize, but not democracy. And today, Europe can once again play an important role in this. Europe and its European institutions can become the world's most successful cross-border peace experiment. Dialogue is a key principle for such a role, a principle established since antiquity in Greece and therefore should be continued in Europe. Democratic dialogue between people acts as a shield for the protection of freedom and democracy by bridging opposition, differences, political and religious stereotypes. Democratic dialogue enables us to envision and design better alternatives for protecting the basic values of humanity and contributing to sustainable global development. We are confident that tonight, on this island, at the Forum of Rhodes, all participants will contribute with democratic and intercultural dialogues in a peaceful and humanitarian approach toward the global geopolitical developments. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Municipality of Rhodes, I would like to welcome you and wish you all the best in this conference.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and thank you again for the great support from the municipality of Rhodes. I have the pleasure now to call on stage a very important person and very close ally and supporter of DOC, with Professor John Chrysolakis, who is with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and a State Secretary for the Greeks abroad. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, for thousands of years now, each special geographic location has rendered Greece the cross point of different civilizations. The outgoing nature of the Greek cultural identity has always fostered and supported an ever-evolving dialogue among diverse cultural elements that come together in Greece and build our common world. The need for peaceful coexistence with our neighboring countries, as well as the need for a constant understanding of our great common problems, has always been the central pillar of Greek politics. The 17th Rhodes Forum comes at a time of intense mobility across international borders, especially within the Mediterranean area, where forces are moving. Greece sees culture as maybe the only vehicle for dialogue and understanding, and it is no coincidence that, together with China, we leverage the foundation of the Ancient Civilizations Forum, involving 10 countries with ancient civilizations. Rhodes, apart from being a timeless crossroad of cultures, it has been also a point of historic international meetings. Dodecanese, where Rhodes belongs, is the most fitting place cohabitated by diverse cultures, people, and perceptions of centuries. The organization of the 17th Rhodes Forum by the DOC Research Institute is the best answer to those who think that the future holds conflicts among social and ethnic groups due to different cultural backgrounds. It is now widely accepted that our common future will be largely defined by the social and political impact of such initiatives. I do wish that the participation of those who have been striving for democracy in their countries and are here to discuss expands the foundations of peace and harmonious coexistence for the people throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. As Secretary General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I welcome you to the hospitable island of Rhodes, and I assure you that we will always support the Rhodes Forum because dialogue itself is one of the fundamental political foundations of the new Greek government. I wish every success to the Forum's work and longevity to this distinguished scientific team that honors Greece by organizing a conference of such a caliber here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Chrysoulakis. It is now my great pleasure to call Dr. Yakunin, who is the chairman of the board of the Dialogue of Civilization. I'd like to take also this opportunity on behalf of my team to express our gratitude to the chairman, but also to the board of the Institute. As you know, there is no organization that can function well without a very effective and committed board, and I think we have very privileged to have the chairman and the board supporting the activities of the organization. Thanks a lot, Professor Yakunin, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Jean-Christophe. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, friends, members of the family of Dialogue of Civilization. It is a great honor for me, on behalf of the Board of Directors and all of you, to welcome distinguished guests and participants of this forum. But I would start with something not that bright. We are going to talk about the most essential problems of contemporary world. One of which is, of course, maybe one of the most dangerous in political essence and human essence is terrorism. The other day, a new atrocity was committed in Berlin against the people. It doesn't matter what nationality, but there were people celebrating their new year, Jewish people. I would like to kindly suggest and invite all the participants in the forum to stand up and express our anger on one side and our solidarity and condolences to the victims of this atrocity. Please stand up for a second. Thank you. Dialogue of Civilization Research Institute inherited a rich history of dialogues in the mankind. We have our own history, previous history of World Public Forum who started to work here. And it was always about dialogue, eliminating the walls, barriers, never to create controversies and to create new walls. The socio-economic transformation which were predicted in the work of World Public Forum, are visible in contemporary world and led to the inevitable emergence of multilateral global order. Information and communication technologies have made a huge impact on all aspects of social life in different cultures and civilizations. Discussions about the possible future of humanity dominate the global agenda in the activities of younger generation. The Rhodes Forum consistently warned of the imbalance between the demand for introduction of new world order and ongoing processes that could plunge the world into a state of disorder, chaos, and possible annihilation. Experts from the dialogue of civilizations over the past 18 years have consistently testified to the fact that a world order based on the principles of technocracy and material consumerism is inherently unstable. This could happen due to the economic failure of existing models of global financial management, as well as the political flaws of existing global management system. And all of humanity is already facing the consequences of the damage that has been done to the environment, a problem that will only intensify in the future. In a historical sense, all nations should be called civilization states. Having some nations be referred to as civilization states, while others are called just national states, shows a kind of dichotomy thinking, because civilizations are the roots for all national states. The explicit return to civilization states indicates ongoing search for new vocabulary that reflects an alternative world order. We think of dialogue of civilization as reputable authority that reaches far beyond dichotomy way of thinking and raises real questions for effective dialogues and practical solutions. At previous Rhodes Forum sessions, prominent experts argued that development of society should be assessed not only by GDP figures, but from the standpoint of living standards, health, education, culture, technological innovation, and security. The unchallenged authority of the market power should not be absolutized, as shows economist Mariana Mazzucata in her book, The Value of Everything, Making and Talking in the Global Economy. The Dialogue of Civilizations initiative and its wide range points focuses together with other progressive civil society institutions on issues in the demand not of technocratic but of humanistic world order. We were addressing the states, politicians, and leading businesses to think about how to reduce the social and material inequality and to preserve the diversity of humankind, cultural heritage. In our opinion, this could provide the basis for the transition to a new sustainable and peaceful era of interaction between civilizations. The new multilateral world order should be based on equality, openness, trust, dialogue, and inclusion. Of course, this is all easier said than done, since the current global political forces will not give up sometimes their political dominance easily. Global transformation have led to the emergence of new powerful players in the era of international relations and within societies themselves. Citizens in different countries have become more involved in social and political processes via social networks. Although open access to the internet and the ability to connect with anyone presents new opportunities as well as challenges. The actual challenge of the digitalization era was presented by Yuval Harari and Mark Zuckerman in their recent conversation that, quote, "Connectivity does not necessarily mean harmony. And Harari asked quite a substantial question: how to make sense of this world which is more connected than ever, but at the same time is building more walls than ever before? This answer to this question can be found only in wide collaboration of institutes of civil societies in different countries. The Dialogue Civilization of Rhodes Forum specially designed and arranged platforms of dialogue to achieve these goals on the basis of mutual respect and equality. One of the most important tasks of the dialogue community is to assess the unfolding anthropological crisis which possibly will destroy the humane in human beings. As a result, could lead to a global humanitarian catastrophe. The debate about civilization states and national states, which we are witnessing now, is very intense among the global civil society members. We have been researching this issue in our recent publications, the Rhodes Report and Anthology. Our experts agree that there is no contradiction between the civilizational approach, which defines states as belonging to one civilization or model or another, and the concept of a national state as a form of self-determination of a nation within a certain independent territory. Rhodes Forum experts agree that new approaches to globalization should be introduced. The world is in search of an effective and objective outlook of ongoing processes. In a situation of recent global order, or indeed disorder, the dialogue of civilization looks at the worldwide that involves possible future scenarios for large cross-civilizational projects in infrastructure development, in economy, culture, and society. We have already stepped forward with an initiative of dialogue-based cross-institutional centers, or hubs, of intercivilizational coordination. These centers are able to contribute to the development of such large projects as Belt and Road Initiative and similar. This project was introduced in the framework of Think 20, the research and policy advice network for G20, and has become one of the policy recommendations to be implemented at the level of G20 participating national governments. Once again, I would like to draw your attention to the Rhodes report, which we released this year. The report offers a vision by the leading experts on the current stage of development and presents possible ways how can lead humanity to a stable, balanced, and more peaceful future. In particular, the report tackles the role of civilization states, the term which could be applied not only to several countries like Russia, India, China, and Turkey, but to any nation. The dialogue of civilizations paradigm describes multilateral formats of interaction both between states and nations and within various societies and ethnic groups. Thus, the dialogue of civilizations philosophy more fully describes the interaction between states and introduces the dimension of humane values in international affairs, cooperation, co-development, preservation of cultural and spiritual heritage as the main guidelines for maintaining a stable and balanced world order. The agenda of the 17th session of the Rhodes Forum is based on civilizational approach and is aimed at resolving issues of economic sustainability, civilization state progress, digitalization, interreligious and cross-cultural interactions. We have a particular focus this year on Africa, and we are proud that esteemed representatives of Africa are today with us, and especially His Excellency, the President of Niger, Mahamadou is a fool. He will join us at a later stage and participate in the work of this forum. Once again, I would like to express my personal and both thanks to the government of Greece, municipality of Rhodes, and I am proud to tell the truth that in the book of esteemed citizens of Rhodes, Aristotle is number 1, and some Mr. Yakunian is somewhere 405. Not a big distance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Yakunin, for, in a way, setting the stage of those 2 days and reminding us or telling us, the spirit or the vision and of the Dialogue of Civilization Institute. The time now is coming for the real start of our deliberation, and I'm very pleased to call on stage now Ali Aslan, who is a very famous journalist in Berlin with Deutsche Welle, and I'm not sure it has been said very clearly, but the Dialogue of Civilization Institute is based in Berlin, and for the past 3 years, and has developed lots of relationship with the Berlin and the German community, and we are very pleased to have for this first session that will be looking at the world order, the world disorder 30 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, to have a very experienced journalist with Ali Aslan to introduce the deliberation. Ali, you're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Jean-Christophe. And indeed, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Let's get this started. 30 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, in search of a roadmap and compass. We all remember, and you will all remember, when Francis Fukuyama at the very end of the Cold War wrote so famously, or by now perhaps infamously, that this is the end of history, implying that we're all going to get along now, subscribe to the same liberal Western democratic order. Well, 30 years later, we know better now. Many hotspots around the world, turbulent times indeed, and we will dedicate this session now to these hotspots and those topics that are dominating the headlines all around the world. And I couldn't have asked for a better panel joining me here. Now, first up, he's the former president of the European Parliament and, of course, the former leader of the German Social Democratic Party. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Martin Schulz. Wonderful to have you, and also wonderful to welcome here from France. She's the OECD Chief of Staff and Sherpa to the G20. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Gabriela Ramos. Wonderful to have you with us, Gabriela, and he's the chairman of the Russian Duma's Committee on Education, as well as the Dean of Public Administration Faculty of Moscow State University. Ladies and gentlemen, Yaslav Ligonov is here, ladies and gentlemen. Please give him a hand. All the way from China here, he's the founder and president of the Center for China and Globalization, the leading think tank in China. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Huai Wang is here. Please give him a hand. Germany has just marked the 29th anniversary of its reunification, and we're about to embark on the 30 years of the fall of the Berlin Wall. If you look at the world today in 2019, what keeps you up at night?
I have limited time. We are living in turbulent times, and the most worrying development is the behavior of the President of the United States. I think that never before a president of such an important country behaved in such an unpredictable way and makes the world uncertain. Look what happens not far from here, the United States of America. And I take this as an example of an unpredictable development in the world, supported a part of the Syrian people fighting against Daesh, against the Islamic State, with all the means of the United States, and now a president from one day to another withdraw that support, even losing in that moment the support of its own people in the United States, the Republican Party, and bringing a situation where war is really, instead of peace-building developments, more intensified. The Turkish army is acting very strongly and creates a lot of risks to enlarge the war instead to bring peace and stability to the region. And this is a good example that we are living in a time of uncertainty. Nothing is predictable, and what we hoped after the fall of the Iron Curtain, that the world would go in a more stable and not a bipolar, under permanent tension living political situation with more dialogue, more exchange, is now replaced around 30 years later by a kind of uncertainty which is, in my eyes, without any precedent.
We live in times of uncertainty, says Martin Schulz. Donald Trump, the US president, is the person that concerns him the most. And of course, Trump himself is very much in hot water right now for his call with Ukrainian president. We'll see how that plays out. But Gabriela Ramos, the OECD, of course, an institution that is basically designed to analyze all the issues that are pertaining to our times, to break it down, to analyze where rooms are still for improvement. When you, as a Mexican living in Paris, working for the OECD, when you look at the world, what is the thing that keeps you up at night?
Well, I feel that it's very interesting that you're framing this discussion with the historic perspective, because that always helps. I think that 30 years ago we thought that everything was solved in terms of the economic model, everything was solved in terms of the political model, and the world moved into this integration of investment, trade, finances, and global value chains. 40% of the jobs in the last 2 decades have been created with their links with trade. And therefore, we thought that just opening markets and focusing on trade exchanges, or following a very clear neoliberal economic thinking, was going to deliver all the goods for everybody. Where we are now is that this growth model that just focused on GDP and GDP per capita did not deliver. Did not deliver because we have a very clear challenge of inequalities. Even in the most advanced economies, what you see is that wealth is kept at the top 10% of the income distribution. The 10% richest people in the OECD countries have 50% of wealth. And then if you go to the 20, they have 30. If you go to the 10, they have 20. So it's like really, and concentration continues. While you have almost half of the population that have not seen their standard of living improved in the last 2 decades. That is fueling populism, because the fact is that we are not for dogmas. We are for results. And if the growth model did not deliver on a fair share of the benefits, I think this is what you get. And then not to talk about the climate emergency, the crisis. It's a crisis. We are seeing how much we are losing on biodiversity. We are seeing, I mean, we say things that are just like common places, like there is more plastic in the sea than fish in volume terms. Well, this is huge. And we're still are trapped into an economic dynamic that is just focusing on how to produce and consume. And then the most important part that you would say, well, but you know, these are always externalities. That's how we treat them, no? The question of social, the question of environment, they're always externalities that you factor in after you grow. We're not growing. We are not even growing. Productivity is very low. The OECD, the IMF, all the international institutions are downgrading the prospects for growth. So even there, financial stability, the possibility of avoiding crisis, because we have this idea that markets will always balance themselves. Well, it's not working. So I think that from the OECD perspective, if this way of organizing ourselves is not delivering in these four very important points, and then to understand that the economy is not an isolated issue that you can just deal with it in an isolated manner. It's linked to the social system, is linked to the environmental system, is linked to the political system.
Right.
And what takes away my sleep at night is that because of this fragmentation and this lack of trust, that was the casualty of the crisis, but it's also the casualty of inequalities, governance is becoming much more difficult at home and in international institutions.
Gabriela Ramos, you have given us a lot to work with here. Obviously, the trade wars, income disparity, climate change, low productivity, all of the topics that are dominating the headlines today and indeed are fueling what you call the rise of populism worldwide. Let's go on. Yaroslav Nikonov, you are, of course, the chairman of the Duma's Committee on Education, very experienced politician from Russia, a country that, of course, has its own take on the fall of the Berlin Wall. Now in 2019, what is the view from Moscow? What keeps you up at night?
Well, I actually sleep well.
That's a relief to hear.
Of course, I disagree that Trump is a source of problems. Trump is a symptom, not a cause. I wouldn't say he's unpredictable. He's very predictable. He's doing exactly what he said during the election campaign and what is good for America. I think the world is getting more and more predictable in a sense that we witness the relative decline of the West. The day the Berlin Wall fell down, I was, by the way, in Berlin that day. Very interesting experience, which I can share if I had time. That day, the West accounted for 80% of the global economy. Now it's closer to 40%. The rise of the West is clear. China and India account for 60% of the global growth. The great civilizations are back. The old rules of the game are not working in a sense that they are all written by the West and for the West, and they will not be rewritten because any rewriting of these rules will mean to reflect the decline of the West. And that's why there will be no new rules. I cannot imagine any big arrangements being negotiated now, including the West. Trump will not negotiate anything. I cannot imagine European Union negotiating anything big. Probably not. That means we are moving into the rules-less world where the old factors of power matter. We are moving to the world where the new bipolarity is emerging. And it's not just America-China. I think it's broader than that. It's the West and the greater Eurasia. With greater Eurasia, of course, having more chances in the world of the future. And inside this greater Eurasia, there are possibilities for dialogue. And this dialogue is pretty extensive. I'm quite active in the BRICS format. I'm the chairman of the Russian BRICS Studies Committee.
And when you talk about bipolarity, the rise and return of bipolarity, what are you talking about? You're talking about the West versus?
I'm telling the West versus the Greater Eurasia. The Greater Eurasia being Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is already more than half of the global population. I'm speaking about BRICS. In BRICS alone, we have more than 100 formats of cooperation and meetings a year. It is not a formalized organization. It does not have any formal rules, but they have certain principles on which we can base international dialogue. And I think the way we deal with each other in BRICS tells us more about how international relations should be built in the future, not looking at the relations between America and China, for example.
Interestingly enough, Yaroslav Nikonov is predicting a decline of the West, something I'm sure, Martin Schulz, you will get a chance later on perhaps to respond or challenge. But of course,
I'm not predicting, it's a fact.
It's a fact. Well, then here at the Rhodes Forum, we'll notice. But at least good to hear that at least one of us is sleeping well. I think that for the record. Let's see. We're talking about you said, of course, the West versus Eurasia. And let's go to Asia, to China, a country that has recently marked its 70th anniversary of Communist China. Henry Wang, you are the founder and president of the leading think tank in China. The view from Beijing these days, what's it like? Describe it to us.
Thank you. Thank you, Ali, for the question, and thank you, the organizer, for inviting to this great forum. I mean, it's really, timing is really very, very good. I mean, as Dr. Yakuni said, these 30 years of the Berlin Wall, and but also it's a time to reflect and to rethink. I just came from Athens yesterday. I was speaking at the New York Times Athens Democracy Forum. The same, you know, I get the feeling now it's the real lot of people talking about. I think that in the past 75 years after Second World War now, and also 30 years after the Berlin Wall, we are now the global system that actually built after the war is now we are under huge, tremendous challenges now. So the global multilateralism is under siege, and also, how can we really get off this conflict? Populism. Now we're also facing Brexit. We also have this yellow vest, and particularly the U.S.-China-U.S. trade wars and things like that. So it's really made the world more complex and more really puzzled for a lot of people. So I think in this kind of a context, how can we think forward? I think that's really this conference is really. Relevant is that we have to think ahead, with this, future looking at the right path we're going to take. So what I'm thinking now is China just celebrates the 70th anniversary, and then you can see the path China has taken is really effective to some extent. It has lifted 800 million people out of poverty. It has doubled life expectancy from 35 years old to 73 now. One of the longest in the world now, and also covered all the Medicare of the citizens in China. So it's incredible, and contribute 30% of the world GDP growth. So a prosperous China is really giving a new impetus to the world economy, and also to really how we can safeguard, enhance, and improve the global governance system. So I think this is really important that we have to work on that. So in order to meet the challenges of this coming era of uncertainty, I think three things probably we could do. One is that we should probably really get on the trade, and also enhance the trade, develop the trade among all the countries, East and West, and Asia and Europe and US, because we see that we haven't got a third world war because of the trade among all the countries, and prosperity and peace and security. So now we are into that. So we try to avoid the economic war, trade war.
Right.
But second, I think infrastructure is important. Now the developing world really needs to be infrastructure connected. So I think this is really great. China has proposed the Belt and Road Initiative, so that we can at least get the massive infrastructure revolution for the next 4 or 7 decades, so that we can connect the world. And then finally, I think that we need to really, as this conference stressed about, have a dialogue, have really that get back to the roots. We are in Greece. Talk about how we can peacefully sit down and find solutions. We cannot really afford conflict and also fight among each other.
Trade, infrastructure, and dialogue, of course, all three essential aspects that Henry just offered. And indeed, China, very much a player in the 21st century, a force to be reckoned with. We'll dive into more detail during the second round. But Shada, you of course are the Director for Europe and Geopolitics at Friends of Europe. Let's talk about Europe. I mean, of course, Martin Schulz, we have the former President of the European Parliament here. We heard that the decline of the West and Europe is a fact, as stated by Yaslav Nikonov. Based in Brussels, if you look at Europe, how dysfunctional is Europe today?
Europe is not dysfunctional in all aspects. Some aspects definitely. In others, I think we're still coming forward. And I have to say, Ali, I'm actually very energized at the moment. Moments of transition, as our Chinese friend has said, it is a moment where things change. There's transition, reform, transformation in the air. And I actually am very pleased that the old era that both of you have talked about is coming to an end. I don't think it's a decline of the West. It's the rise of the rest that is very, very important. It energizes me, makes me very optimistic that we could be on the verge of reordering the world. Now, this will depend to a large extent on the three gentlemen here and their countries. It is absolutely essential that we don't hoard power in Europe and the West. We share it with the rest of the world. And I have a few solutions to doing that. I think we should get rid of the G7. I think the G7 has absolutely passed its sell-by date. We need to reinvigorate the G20 and make it into something more substantial than it is at the moment. It's more of a crisis mode, but we should make it something more. Also, Europe has to get rid of this sort of arrogance that we own the IMF slot and the World Bank goes to the United States. We have to change that. We need to get qualification and merit. And most important, Ali, I think we have to stop relying on this unreliable partner that Martin Schulz has talked about, the transatlantic alliance, and really commit ourselves as Europeans to Eurasia. And also beyond that, to Afro-Eurasia. So I'm very energized. What worries me about Europe is the rise of populism. Is terrorism, far right as well as jihadi terrorism. I think we need to come to terms with the fact that populism is growing because mainstream parties are embracing the rhetoric of the far right. It's not just the far right politicians that are poisoning our discourse. And we have to say also that we need to bring more diversity, Ali, into our European institutions. People like me, I'm a European, you are, we're rare. We really are rare. Europe needs to open up and practice what it preaches when it talks about human rights. Now, three things really make me happy today, all right? Teen power, not just Greta Thunberg. She gets all the limelight and the celebrity and the attention, but across the world, Malala Yousafzai. Across the world, people, young people, are coming forward and embracing the new world with new ideas. Wow, what amazing power there is there. Also, women. I mean, it's not just #MeToo that is important, but how women are actually leaders. Leaders like Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand shows that you can be a powerful woman without embracing all the male characteristics. I think that's very important. And my final point would be local authorities. Local authorities like the mayor of Rhodes here, but not just him. Local mayors, citizens across Europe, across the world are waking up as well. So for me, Trump, unreliable, unpredictable, not a good friend to Europe at the moment, has energized the world. And I, frankly, don't sleep because sometimes my brain is just going whirl, 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 whirl. So I like this moment.
And thank you so much, Ada. You not only analyzed the situation and the world as it is, or Europe as it is today, but you offered solutions along the process. Get rid of the G7, bolster the G20, perhaps less reliance on transatlantic relationships, move more towards the Eurasian world, and the arrogance that perhaps the Europeans sometimes display vis-à-vis the IMF need to be abandoned. The young generation here, obviously, you mentioned them, gives you a great deal of hope, and we see the movements all across the world, civil engagements, local authority, and most importantly, perhaps women such as yourself and Gabriela Ramos, of course, who are bolstering and contributing to a better world. Alphonse, we talked about China, we talked about a very ambitious country now in the 21st century. Your country, of course, India, very much ambitious, very much on the map, trying to shape events and putting itself on the map here. When you look at the world from New Delhi, what do you see?
See, I was one of the people who were extremely thrilled 30 years back when the Berlin Wall came down. In fact, I had a huge party in my house. I said, wow, the world is so much safer. I think now we're not going to build walls anymore, but we're going to get together to solve the problems of humanity. But today, as we gather here, I think it's a tragic world. What's happening today, we have an extremely xenophobic nations, people building walls everywhere, the physical walls, the mental walls, all across the world. And of course, I see a second crusade coming up. Where are we? It's in that situation that our Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, I think we can very proudly say we have an excellent relationship with China, our great neighbor here who has done dramatic things over the past 30 years to abolish poverty. We have our great friend Russia, with whom we have traditionally great relationship. With the United States, we have a fantastic relationship, and also with Europe from all over. And with our little neighbors, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, I think India, fundamentally our belief has always been we are one of the oldest civilizations in the world, but sorry, we do not have a monopoly on civilization. We do not believe this is so fundamental to India. If you can say what is the crux of Indian civilization and our worldview, can be reduced to two words, Vasudeva Kudumbakam, which basically means that the whole universe is one. And this is exactly what India has been trying to do. And for us, politics is very important. It is not just about winning an election. I think for a lot of people today, fundamentally their global view is driven by winning the election. Who is your electorate? Let me ponder to that. I don't want to mention countries. This is happening. That leads to building of walls. I think today is more dangerous than any time in the history of the world. I think we need to change these things. And for us in India, it's just not about having great relationship with the rest of the world. It's about having growth for whom? That's a fundamental question again we ask. I mean, you'd be shocked, a lot of people here. In the past 5 years, in India, we have built 115 million toilets. Has it ever happened in the history of the world? We opened bank accounts for 350 million people. Today, there's not one person in the country who doesn't have a bank account and who doesn't get money directly from the government. We have now providing electricity in every house, free connection. I think so. Growth for us doesn't mean some people trying to grab things. We're trying to grab things, sorry. For us, it's been our philosophy that the whole world is one. We need to get along very well. So with that now, the Chinese Prime Minister is in India this week. And this is, I think, the 4th meeting we have. Our Prime Minister travels around the world saying, hey, let's work together. Let's bring down these walls. First of all, we just need to get out of these mental walls. I think that's more important than the physical walls. So I guess here we have an example. We are now the fastest growing economy in the world. And so we are not matching up, of course, in terms of per capita income with a lot of people, but we have now built the fundamentals for every citizen to live a dignified life. I think that's so important when we look at internally for us, international relations and our domestic, the well-being of every citizen is so important for us. That's democracy.
Let's bring down the mental walls, and your words very much reiterated the confidence that India exudes these days. Obviously, you talked about the growth that your country, the rapid pace that your country is setting forth in order to become one of the prominent players in global affairs today. But you also reiterated, Martin Schulz, that we live in the most dangerous times ever in the history of humanity, says Alphonse Kanantam from India. Would you concur? Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. What is the decline of the West? Has a precondition to analyze this thesis. What is the West? What is the West? The West is not only a geographical topic. There's a question. And when you introduced at the beginning Fukuyama, he spoke not only about the victory of one economic system, he spoke about values, democracy, freedom of speech, mutual respect, the guarantee of individual citizens' rights, media, freedom of media, freedom as a key element, individual freedom guaranteed by the state. This is one of the key elements of the definition of what is the West, insofar as Australia, a Western country, or Japan, a Western country. The West is an idea. And if the decline of this idea is at stake, I, for me, feel confirmed as a pro-European, as fighting for European integration, strengthening the European Union as a union of sovereign countries, but agreeing to cooperate economically, politically, on the basis of these values: individual citizens' rights, freedom of speech, mutual respect, and the fight against anti-Semitism, racism, the new borders built all over in the world.
But we have to be honest here, even some European countries are failing on that front.
Absolutely, absolutely. And therefore I support in these countries the opposition fighting against these governments, quite clear. And insofar the decline of the West is, by the way, supported of some parties, supported by the country Mr. Nikonov is representing here. Marine Le Pen, for example, or Mr. Salvini are always referring to Russia and to the Russian style of politics. I disagree, because I think Russia deserves not to be identified with these peoples. But nevertheless, it's not surprising that they who want the decline of the West are referring especially to one country, which is, I repeat it, not the responsibility of that country, but the country and the government in Moscow should reflect why these people are referring to them. So decline of the West means, for me, the West must defend its values and must fight, and for me the answer is a strengthened European Union. By the way, China is an enormous economy, India is an enormous economy. These two countries, together, neighbor countries, are representing a third of world population. They are deciding in the 21st century. But the European single market is still the strongest and the richest per capita in the world, and all people, the Chinese, like the Indians, and the Americans, and also Russia, wants to get with their goods and services on the markets of the European Union. So my proposal is to stop the so-called decline of the West is, who wants to get access to our market has to respect fundamental values, for example, environmental values and standards, or human rights standards. Therefore, we are not only in a decline of the West, we are, as Western Democrats, attacked internally and from outside, and I'm still fighting to defend our system and our values.
So you disagree, just for the record?
With Mr. Nikonov,
you
I disagree
with Mr. Nikonov
entirely. Yes.
What the West is in decline, Mr. Nikonov. I give you a chance to respond. By the way, you only need one microphone.
When you listen to a speech like that, you understand the West is something superior to the rest, which we people living in other parts of the world, in India, China, in Russia, just do not buy. You're not superior. Your values are okay, you know. Who is against freedom of speech? Who is against democracy? But we also know that such things are as anti-Semitism, racism, colonialism, fascism, Nazism, communism. These are all Western ideas. They were not invented in India, China, or Russia. What happened in Iraq? 20-year war in Afghanistan. What is going on in Syria? What happened to Libya? These are the Western policies. This is something which does not tell that the West is better. Well, not telling the rest are better, but we should base our relations not on the concept of superiority of the West, which is declining economically, politically. Even spending 80% of the global military expenditures, NATO does not have military superiority. But I definitely support the idea of basing our dialogue on values. And there are values which can be shared by all of us and which are shared by those nations and civilizations which do engage in dialogue the West is very hard to negotiate, because from this they have an innocence, they have a presumption that they are above, and the rest should follow the line. I can, if allowed, Ali, maybe next time you'll give me the chance to enumerate the values we should really follow to be engaged in the dialogue, and not just telling that you guys are wrong and the others, and we're always right. So,
well, certainly
if you want to deal with somebody, and I think that's something the West should learn, you should speak with others as with equals.
Well, certainly this is a very honest debate, as it is already exposing the rifts, of course, and the tensions and conflicts that are going on around the world. We promised an open dialogue here at Rhodes Forum, and we have it now. Martin Schulz, before I move on and go to Chara, I want to give you the opportunity to quickly respond, because I think you've been addressed, your remarks were addressed directly.
In democratic systems, sovereign countries decide on their own. And therefore I'm very grateful that he took the example of the Iraq War. Bush and Cheney decided against all the advices, and as we know today, on the basis of fraud. There was no existence of weapons of mass destruction. And it was not covered by the United Nations, and therefore the West was split. There was a lot of countries arguing and acting against. For me, for example, it remains until today a moment of pride that my country, Germany, didn't join that alliance under the leadership of Gerhard Schröder, who was, by the way, always arguing for a close cooperation with Eurasia. And the just Jacques Chirac, who just some days ago passed away, shared that view. France and Germany, two representing countries, the main countries representing the European Union, were completely against. So that shows that one of the values I defend, sovereignty and freedom of decision, not to be oppressed by a superpower, to follow. We are strong, you have to follow, because you are weaker than us. This is not Western style. That was Cheney, that was Bush, this is Trump today. But I think it was a very strong moment that Western countries defended their values by saying it is not covered by the United Nations. That means it is not permitted to interfere in the sovereignty of such a country. But I agree with him that later on, Great Britain especially, and France, under the leadership of Cameron and Sarkozy, interfered in Libya in a similar way, like the United States did it in Iraq, and the results are known. Therefore, I argue once more, Western values means respect, also respect of the integrity of sovereign countries and all actions internationally under the leadership of the United Nations. One conclusion: to strengthen international cooperations in the frame of international organizations. May the United Nations, especially, or the European Union, is for me the key element for the solutions of the problems of our times.
Shara, I know you wanted to jump in. I'll give you the floor, and then we move on to Gabriela Henry, and of course bring Alphonse back in here, because this is not supposed to be a Eurasia or Russia versus West debate here, of course. Shara, jump in here.
I just wanted to say that this is the kind of discussion we should be having, but what worries me is that often it's us and them, binary choice. You're either with these people, the West, or you're with the others. The world is not made of that. You know, the world is more complex. It's a multiplex world. People think differently, and European values, Martin, are actually universal values. These are the values in the Declaration of Human Rights. We have, as Europeans, embraced them very, very forcefully, but the rest of the world has signed up as well, and I think we should say that it's not just our prerogative, it's the world. And I think it's so important to to note also what you've said. The West is splintered at the moment. So this idea that there were some homogenous Trumpists everywhere in Europe, and we're not. We've woken up as Europeans. We've realized that we have to stand on our own 2 feet. That's what strategic autonomy discussions are all about, not just in security, but also in trade. So Europe, I think one of the things that fascinates me in Europe is the transformation, the journey we're embarked on. It's a fantastic journey. It's a changing concept. And so the binary choices really worries me. And gentlemen, I don't think women would go, I'm sorry, I'm being very, very feminist here. I don't think binary choice is something that I would adopt as a world view. We should be able to do it. Finally, Ali, Europe has great powers. It's the market power, Martin mentioned it, regulatory power, but also when we in Europe talk to civil society across the world, whether it's India, Russia, or China, they do believe in our values. The problem is, Martin, we don't believe in those values anymore, and you know who I'm talking about.
Standing up to one's own values here, very important. We've broken up from the United States, says Shada, of course. Now, unfortunately, some breaking up within the EU. We haven't talked about Brexit yet. Probably we'll come to that just a moment. That would take up just another hour. Gabriela, I saw you take diligent notes while the debate was ongoing. Go ahead, please.
I'm just enjoying this debate.
Well,
and I'm enjoying it
happy.
because I'm Mexican. So I can speak my mind. No, the fact is that, I remember when I was doing my master, Professor Huntington wrote The Clash of Civilizations, and he had these divisions between the West and the rest, and it was the West and the rest all the time. Yeah. But I'm with Shada with the fact that all these human rights are universal values. And probably what got Vladislav reaction is that you both are saying our values, our values. These are shared values by everybody, which I have to say I live in France, and Europe is withholding, is trying to pursue these values strongly of democracy and freedom of speech and freedom of many other human needs in terms of fulfilling their own potential. Huntington said that Mexico was a torn country, that we might go to the north or we might go to the south. And I thought that was a terrible characterization. Actually, I think he accepted me in his class because he thought I was to confirm that view, and I said, no way. Mexico is different, and the fact that we use all these categorizations to characterize and to say, oh, you are in and you're out, is breaking us apart. The fact is that we should be building something that is more solid. My concern is that because we have not delivered for people, as I said, we have not delivered for people, even democracy is being questioned. This is what worries me. I'm not here for a philosophical debate of what is better, democracy or not democracy. That's a question that I feel we have addressed and solved in certain ways.
Do you think those who are questioning democracy, those who have lost faith in the current system, you think they have a point?
Why did the youth did not vote in the Brexit referendum? The youth, the young generation did not vote. Sorry, but they were not comfortable with the way this was organized. What is happening, that what people are perceiving, and this is the danger, this is the great danger, because I feel that we might be losing the most important deliverable of what many people have built for so many years in terms of this system that allows people to express and to choose their form of government might be in danger because of these bad results.
How do we reinstate? How do we reinstate then this belief in democracy?
Let me tell you what is our real concern. And we are not a political organization, thank God. We don't deal with defense or political issues. But what we see is that these inequalities of income and opportunities that I was referring to has led to inequalities of access to politics. And therefore, we're very comfortable saying, oh, we are democratic. Who pays for the elections? How do you finance election campaigns? Who is holding us back from putting a price on carbon? Why cannot we dewire from fossil fuels, even stopping to paying and subsidizing fossil fuels? I mean, we need to understand that the political systems, even if they are based on the democratic rule, are sometimes very skewed for economic influence. So this is what I feel that we should be addressing. If all of us who believe in democracy, if all of us who believe in the rule of law, if all of us who believe that the human and the people should be at the center of our efforts, not the governments, the systems, we need to reframe this, and we need to rethink how do we ensure that democracies express the will of people, which I don't think is happening in many places.
And the increased inequality worldwide, indeed. This parent income wealth is a big problem that is making a lot of people lose faith in the current system and withdrawing from it in return, Henry. Now, you have just witnessed the debate here between representatives from Russia, Germany, Europe as a whole, Russia versus the West, the debate, unfortunately, that's been going on for quite some time. Now, looking, of course, from China, from Beijing, you could be the laughing third, if you will. Many people have called the 20th century the American century. Perhaps some call it the European century. The 21st century very much characterized and predicted to be the Asian century, and the Chinese one in particular. But of course, your country is not free of troubles. You have demographic challenges, of course, and so on and so forth. What do you see, if you look at the debate here around the table about values, about dialogue, where does China fit in?
Yeah, I think this is a fascinating discussion, and it's quite stimulating. And so, you know, we're here 30 years after Berlin Wall. I mean, exactly 30 years. So I see there are some bright spot as well. We had the European Union, you know, expanded in the last 30 years. And actually, as a matter of fact, EU is the largest economy. You know, we say US is the largest, China is second, but actually EU is the largest. But it's just how we can, you know, now we're having all this trouble now. That's, I think, this timing to reflect is very, very relevant. And second is China is rising peacefully, you know, for the last 30 years. China now become the second largest or third largest economy in the world. So we see the problem of democracy and values and you know, re-evaluation now. I mean, you know, we have seen the populism, particularly with this technology, you know, proliferation, and also the social media, even the fake news. So it has all actually changing the world right now. So I think now we are facing a lot of challenges. And I agree with our friend said that, for example, the gap between rich and poor, it's getting worse. And the 1% in the United States they have wealth more than 90% of the masses they have. So that kind of problem is worldwide. So I think that is really important. But one of the key issues, I think, is that the global governance is falling behind global practice. For example, in the last 7 decades, you know, the multinational corporations, you know, everywhere, they actually operate worldwide. But then a lot of that is not benefiting the host country or the home country. And so that I think that's really create a lot of challenges for the global governance. And I think that's where China is really shared some bright spot. Because you know, China is really working hard. Like Alibaba, Tencent, they work 9 to 9 this week. And then the Chinese government is working 5-year plan after another 5-year plan. So the effectiveness, the productivity, you know, China has built a vast infrastructure, the high-speed railway. The total length of that is equal to the next 10 countries combined. Whereas the US military budget is next to the 10 countries combined. So you can see China focused on those things, and that's really made a lot of difference. So it made people to think about. So I think the way to get out of that is how we can really strengthen the multilateral system.
The innovation and productivity of China, as you said correctly, is very immense and impressive indeed. But, you know, Shah Islam just said about the values that Martin Schulz put forth, about freedom of expression, freedom of speech, of participation. These are not European or Western values. These are human values. Do they also pertain to China?
Absolutely. I think that there's a degree, you know, of you know, a priority. Sometimes you have to choose. It's a hard choice, you know, to govern a country of 1.4 billion people, and then to really cohesiveness of the country to go together, and then, you know, there's no bombshell, there's no shooting in the street. Everywhere you go is very safe in China, and then there's no terrorist actions anywhere in China. And people are living, you know, 800 million people are getting out of poverty, 70% reduction of the poverty of the world. So if China is doing so well, I mean, like Deng Xiaoping said, it doesn't matter if it's white cat or black cat, as long as it catches mice. So if this can provide us peace and prosperity to the world, and we should think about how we can really accept, or maybe, you know.
So what do you say to those who would disagree? Would it say, well, you know, China is not subscribing to the same set of values that we just talked about? What would you tell them if someone were to argue like that?
I would not say China is not subscribed to the same value. Actually, China is subscribed to a lot of value. You know, the core values of China, 24 items, democracy, freedom, you know, speech, everything. You know, it's there. But I think there's a degree. China prioritizes, you know, like the development right. I mean, the survival right. And people live into up to, you know, 10,000 per capita. That's really the way that they get people out of poverty. You know, like there's 1.2 billion people using a smartphone in China. Basically, they're using their cashless pay to vote every day. It's a market economy. It's a hybrid. You know, 80% is the private sectors. So that China is doing a right formula. So I think, you know, it's time for China to contribute. Like AIIB, now they have 100 member countries. You know, they have the one president from China, 6 presidents from India, from UK. Now, you know, out of the total disbursement, India is the largest recipient. So that kind of multilateral system, like OECD, World Bank, IMF, we need to upgrade. We need to collaborate.
And before we jump to Alphonse, whose opinion I want to get, Gabriela, did you want to jump in here? Did you want to jump in about what Henry said?
No, I was just thinking about this question of OECD needing to open. I think that we, since the last decade, have been really working closer to with the key economies, and with China in particular, with Russia, with many of the key economies. But one of the focus point where I feel we made a lot of progress is the G20, as Shada mentioned. G20 has provided a great platform and force to move the agenda forward. But the G20 now is also under a lot of strain. So these tools and these mechanisms that we used to have to advance consensual decisions in the international infrastructure, governance infrastructure, I think they are under a lot of strain as the multilateral institutions are.
Alphonse, I wanted to come to you also about the question about the Asian century. As I said, the 20th century has been marked as the American/European century by many historians. This century very much predicted to be Asian, Chinese, but also Indian century. Is your country equipped for this responsibility?
Obviously, I think, let me start a couple of things from where I said earlier. I think we've spoken enough about what is fundamentally wrong with the world today. Can we talk about how do we, as we Indians see, how do we set these things right? I think number one, democracy is not negotiable. We are very clear on this. And India has a tradition, repeatedly for the past 70 years, of protecting democracy right up to the grassroots, elections right up to the panchayat level. Number two, I think if the world is going to get better, we need to give up this perception that some civilization is better than other. India and China, we can write volumes on why we have a great civilization. Volumes for thousands of years. Sorry, doesn't go down anymore. Nobody is superior. Let's forget about Americans or Europeans or anybody being superior. Let's stop that mindset and see we are all here together. Some people had done historically sometime better. I mean, India and China together had 25% of the global wealth in 1700, not so far away. So we're talking about we all have done well together. I think we just need to get out of this mindset. Some have exploited more. We haven't. India hasn't. And we have no objective of exploiting anybody else. So can we stop destroying each other? Number one. Number one.
It's a good suggestion, by the way. I think everybody would subscribe to that.
No, we are out destroying each other today. Every country is out destroying each other. Even look at the European Union. By Brexit, what do you mean? You are, I think, out to destroy each other. Can we stop doing that? Number one. Can we take on fundamentals? Religious fundamentalism and terrorism which comes with that. Can we deal with that globally? Are we willing to do that? I don't know all these talk about the global bodies dealing with the UN doesn't have, UN is broke. They have sent a notice to 38,000 employees saying, sorry, no more salary in another week's time. Nobody wants to pay. You think you are right, I will deal with the world the way I want to. I really think it's time we all sit together and talk. And thirdly, I think much bigger dangers are coming with digital revolution. I was not only Minister for Tourism, I was also Minister for Information Technology India till 3 months back. I think now the people who are going to dominate technology, digital technology, they are going to dominate the world through either right information or fake information. Let's say more through fake information than through the right information. And here is again where we have used technology in India, digital technology. We have now empowered 1.3 million people of India by the Aadhaar card, one unique card which we have given to every citizen, which is linked to the bank accounts, to our health care, to everything else. And even look at this. Just using that card, every citizen of India can go to any hospital and get medical facility worth 500,000 rupees, which is not small. Every citizen. So I really think it's just not about playing global politics, who is going to have more power, who is going to grab more resources. I think it's about empowering the citizen to be genuinely democratic and live a dignified life. Can we globally say, sorry, it's not me, my colored race, it's not my just country, there is a world beyond that. Which is what is you're talking about, the liberal European values. I think these were the values we talked about once upon a time. But I think those have turned on its head today.
So you're asking for a notion, an idea that we move beyond nationalism, if you say about nationalistic view.
See, this is where I think one little girl who came and told the United Nations, in front of the United Nations the other day, said, "You have destroyed my dream," that 16-year-old, I think she said it right.
But I think the point you're raising, I think no one here on this panel and in this room would argue with the fact or not support your view that we stop destroying each other. But at the end of the day, what is the key here? How do you stop the erosion that Gabriela Ramos talked about, that Shara, how do you stop the erosion of trust? Worldwide, by the way, not just in Europe or the US, worldwide in democratic institutions, in the values that we thought are firmly cemented around the world. There is an erosion of trust all around the world, including your own country. The inequality is, of course, is staggering. How do you solve that? I think we are in Greece, of course, a country that has suffered massively throughout an economic crisis. How do we stop the erosion? How do we make people believe again in politicians and institutions?
I think this is where, I think if you look at it, when our Prime Minister came to power 5 years back, he said, number one, my priority, he was a tea seller, can you imagine? He sold tea in railway stations as a kid. He becomes the Prime Minister of India. This is democracy. He said, I'm here for you to bring change in your life. I'll make that difference along with you. And we wiped out corruption in 5 years. Today, nobody talks about corruption. Not one minister in the union government, even I was a member of the cabinet, was ever accused of corruption. Wiped out corruption. Built out basic infrastructure. To me, this is creating a better world through politics. Sorry, I think there should be less of politics in politics. There must be more of humanity in politics. Looking at making your people better along with the rest of the world. I think we just need to have a complete change of this way we look at the world. Why are we here? I think there are only two objectives of why we are here. To be happy and to make somebody else happier.
Well, hopefully we will have made some people happy after the end of this panel. That's why I invite all of you now for the final round. And for that, gentlemen, and of course ladies, I want substantial concrete proposals as to, I think that we have talked extensively and firmly and correctly, of course, about the many issues, conflicts all around the world, the troubles that we're facing. Now it's time to move forward in the remaining 20 minutes here, Martin Schulz. As a very experienced politician, as we go around the table, you've talked about what keeps you up at night, you talked about what troubles you, looking at Europe and beyond the world. How do we fix this?
For me, the solution to defend what I call Western values and to avoid what he calls the decline of the West is that we defend one of the most successful ideas, in my eyes, in the second half of the 20th century. This is transnational integration. To stop to kill each other has a precondition. To respect mutually each other, so as we are. That we respect another nation with that a country like Turkey with 98% of population, Islamic population, could become a member state of the European Union because we share values, individual citizens' rights, across different religious affiliation, for example. Or that Germany and France, during centuries and centuries, enemies with a terrible past, were able to reconcile, that small countries like the Netherlands, Belgium, or Luxembourg could, after the Second World War, join a common union with Germany, even if the Germans destroyed, for example, the whole Jewish community in Belgium. Was, in my eyes, one of the most successful endeavors ever in the history of mankind. That countries and nations across borders cooperate with one common goal: to stabilize peace, to avoid war, to make war impossible, because the integration culturally, economically, politically is so deep that war becomes unthinkable, and that it happens on the basis of mutual respect culturally. This was the idea of European integration. It was one of the most successful projects in the history of our continent. This is not to export it to other parts of the world, because other parts of the world have another structure, another history, other challenges than Europe had. But to export that idea that countries and nations across borders, independently from their religious affiliation, from the color of their skin or the past, could cooperate economically and politically, that idea is a proposal. It is a Western proposal to other parts of the world. I know from a lot of discussions with the President of China, with Xi Jinping, I had the privilege to meet him often, that he is sharing exactly that view, that under certain circumstances, countries and nations across borders should cooperate, and with one goal. That was the European goal at the beginning of the 50s. Not richdom for the few, but wealth for all, and security for all. This is what is missing, and the promise we cooperate across borders with that goal was not kept during the last 25 years. This is one of the biggest errors, and the erosion, as you called it, of these Western values has a lot to do with the disappointment that governments promised now a period of wealth will start, and the result was that the few have a lot and the rest has every year less. If we stop this and turn it in the other way around with, for example, some, in my eyes, very important measures, a common European tax regime. It's impossible that ordinary citizens pay their taxes, and that the super rich can bring their money to tax havens. It's one of the elements to regain trust. If we achieve this, the 21st century will not be a European century, but could be also a European century.
So Europe, don't count Europe out. I think this is the firm message that we're getting from Martin Schulz, still very much believing in Europe, and of course as a former president of the European Parliament, remaining a leader of the European cause here. Václav Nikonov, you clearly have made it clear throughout this discussion that you have a different point of view here, but perhaps I could also ask you, perhaps trying to end on an optimistic note about where we head from here. How do we solve the ongoing conflicts and of course this climate of lack of trust that we have also witnessed here around this table today?
Of course, this Eurocentric view of the world is something which prevailed the discussion for many decades. Actually, the fight for Europe was the essence of global politics for centuries. That's not anymore. Europe is not that relevant. Being an economic superpower politically, it's a dwarf. But actually, speaking about the prospects and the possibilities, I think the best way to think is value-based, but the set of values must be applied to everybody. We do not question the values of democracy, human rights, rule of law. It's universal. But there are some other principles and values which should be applied to international dialogue and dialogue of civilizations. First, sovereignty. Concept of sovereignty as a value. Two, non-interference in domestic affairs of each other, which the West is oftentimes doing. Three, respect for traditions and values of other countries. China, India, Russia have their own values. We were speaking about American or European century, but we can speak about Chinese millennia. China has been the biggest economy in the world for 5 millennia. And who can tell the Chinese how to organize life, or to Indians, which has a very different actually system, which sometimes one of my Indian friends calls it functioning anarchy, but it works. And it will not work in China. It will not work in Russia, because everyone has its own tradition. 4, value of freedom. First of all, freedom from diktat, from external domination, from foreign bases on your soil, Mr. Schultz. Freedom is very important. 5, democracy. Democracy defined as the respect of the will of your own people, not of the State Department, not of the European Parliament, not of White House, Respect of your own people. Our people have the right to decide their future, not someone in the West, which is the idea. And democracy has many faces. America is a democracy. America is a democracy. Who will copy American democratic model these days? American political model? Who will do that on Earth? I don't think anyone. Fukuyama was wrong with the end of history idea, but he is absolutely right in his recent writings about dysfunctionality of the American political system. It's democratic. It doesn't work. It doesn't work for the good of the people. It doesn't work for the good of the world. It makes it dangerous, yes, because the American political system is dysfunctional. 6, the rule of international law. Read UN Charter more often than you usually do. 7, equal rights of nations, which is in the UN Security Charter, in the UN Charter. All nations are equal. That is something you are missing. 8, respect of the dignity of other nations. 9, try to build consensus, as we do in BRICS. We have 100 formats in order to come to one paper, and we make this paper, despite of great differences between the countries. We do that. We don't even try to do it with the West. Americans do not even try to reach consensus with anybody on any issue, and the same about Europe. And finally, take the others as they are, and not as you want them to be. Because that's also the key to good relations. If we base our dialogue on these principles, as we do in BRICS, we can come to a more safe, stable world in which we can live together in peace and harmony. Thank you.
So this is the silver lining then. Please. Gabriela Ramos. As you said, the international institution OECD, of course, is one that looks at the problems and ways for improvement all around the world. That's why I'm looking for those solutions to improve this world and also to lift up the debate and dialogue here around this podium.
I had a very clear idea of what I wanted to say, but what I'm hearing in the comments by Slav is that we are always focusing on criticizing the other. I think that we should stop that. We should go into saying a self-reflection of what is good and what is bad in each one of the systems, because everybody has something to contribute. And I have to say that I'm very happy living in France. I love France, so I'm a little bit European. The fact is that I feel that independently of the model that you choose, because societies are sovereign to define their own solutions, and that's a fact, I feel that what we really need to focus, as I said at the beginning, is to try to have a growth model that delivers for people and for the planet. If we don't focus on that, we are always going to be talking about the means, we're going to talk about the infrastructure, we're going to talk about governance in the abstract, when what we really need to do is to refocus what we built as a system that was really trying to factor in production and consumption functions, GDP per capita, material well-being as a proxy for progress, and at the end we forgot what we forgot, the social outcomes, as I said, the distribution of those benefits, and we forgot the planetary boundaries. So for us at the OECD, what we're trying to do is to try to move away from this growth model that was just focusing on ensuring that, that markets were efficient. Because we thought that was, no, growth will trickle down, growth will fix it, you bring back the externalities, the environment is an externality, and you just fix it after you grow. I think that's no longer the case. I have to say that we are really worried about the fact that the fate of people in China, in Russia, in France, in my country, is defined by the family where you are born. We have just made a publication that is the broken social elevator. It will take 5 generations for a kid that was born in a poor family to reach to the middle income. If you are born in a family whose parents didn't reach secondary education, you have 15% chances of reaching that level. While if your parents reach, and it doesn't matter the country, if your parents reach university level, you have 65% chances. So I think that we need to recognize that whatever the system, some are better than others, we need to recognize that in taking care of people, but whatever the system, we are seeing this disconnection between what the numbers tell us about economic progress and economic performance and what people are feeling. And this disconnection is fueling the populisms that we are seeing. So how would we do it? Broaden the measurement of well-being. It's not about GDP, it's about well-being of people. 11 dimensions, what the people care, listening to people, health, jobs, quality jobs, not creating jobs. And think about also the question of the digitalization. It's going to have an impact in the way we organize ourselves. And therefore, if in the 30s we have the emergence of the welfare state because of the huge crisis that we had in 1930s, I think that now we need to think about an empowering state that will look into these issues. And of course, I will not miss mentioning gender, because the fact is that we talk a lot about how to ensure that women also fulfill their full potential, and we're still there trying to move ahead and delivering on the SDGs. Happily to report that we have a success. Yesterday, the OECD presented a plan to the G20 to agree on a framework to ensure that multinationals pay their fair share of taxes, and that the digital platforms also pay their share of taxes. So I think that there are some good news around this more gloomy environment.
Very good. Ending with good news here, ending on a positive note, and indeed moving away perhaps from the old thinking of putting wealth, accumulation of wealth at the very forefront, putting that aside and start emphasizing and focusing once again on the well-being of the human being, very much what you, Alphonse, of course, put forth, social transparency, something that is extremely important to give everyone a fair chance here to move ahead. Henry, let's get your last words in as well. China, of course, one of the big players right now and for the foreseeable future. What is the silver lining? What is the silver lining that you want to end on here with a view from Beijing?
Sure. Thank you. I'm not representing Beijing, but as a think tank, in China, I certainly have some thinking on that. I think this is really a great discussion that we're talking about the roadmaps and what compacts for the next 30 years. And I was in Athens yesterday, and the New York Times Athens Democracy Forum was talking about reinventing democracy. You know, as the birthplace of in Greek we are now that you know of democracy, which is you know over 2,000 years ago. They've talked about Aristotle and all those people. Now actually the real practice of democracy is only 100, 200 years old. Particularly after Second World War, all the countries, right, to do that. So democracy needs a lot of improvement and also meet a lot of challenges now. You know, we have the populism, we have the fake news, we have the social media proliferation. So democracy is under siege, as a matter of fact. So how can we do that? So there's a couple of things I think I can recommend. But also you can say that democracy, when you over practice that, it become anarchy, and then